The greatest war of the ancient world did not end in glory. A city burned, but from its ashes rose not victory, only a curse. Achilles' rage, Hector's fall, the screams of Troy swallowed by fire. The gods began this war, but men turned it into something monstrous. And when the flames finally died, even the victors were not spared, because that night something greater than a city fell. Not Troy, humanity. Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we are not simply opening a book. We are unsealing a memory older than memory itself. The oldest surviving story cycle of the Western world waits for us, not as ink on parchment, but as breath carried through firelit halls, whispered across generations, sung before cities were stone and before temples had roofs. This is the world of gods and monsters, of riddles that outlive their speakers, of love so radiant it reshapes the sea, of war so absolute it fractures heaven. Tonight, we journey through Greek mythology, not as fragments, not as scattered legends, but from the beginning to the very roots of existence. We will walk the wind-swept heights of Olympus before it had a name. We will descend into the suffocating depths beneath the earth. We will stand at the rim of the world, where ocean meets darkness and stars feel close enough to wound. These myths were never merely stories. They were attempts to explain thunder, to justify suffering, to give shape to death, to understand why love binds and why fate breaks. As always, before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? What hour has found you? Are you beneath a quiet sky, city lights flickering like distant constellations? Or are you already drifting towards sleep, your thoughts loosening their grip on the day? Wherever you are, let this be a softer descent. Let this be the firelight at the edge of your night. Because what follows is not modern. It was not written for comfort. It was born in fear, in awe, in wonder, and carried across thousands of years by human voices who believed the world was alive. And tonight, it belongs to you. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not the kind of nothing that follows destruction. Not the empty silence after a storm. Not darkness waiting to be pierced by light. There was no waiting. There was no before. There was no space in which waiting could occur. No earth. No sky. No horizon dividing one from the other. No time to measure. No gods to rule. No mortals to question. Not even silence, because silence requires something that could make sound. This was chaos. Not a creature. Not yet a personality. Not the horned trickster later poets would imagine. Chaos was condition, an immeasurable yawning absence, a formless vastness that was neither empty nor full, because those words had not yet been invented by reality. And yet, within that incomprehensible gulf lay potential, not as intention, not as destiny, but as inevitability, and from that unfathomable chasm, stirred by forces that even the gods would never name, something shifted. The first form emerged, Gaia, the earth. She was not born from a womb. There was no womb, no midwife, no creator shaping her from clay. She simply was. Foundation, substance, ground, vast and unmoving, endless and patient. She stretched outward in all directions, becoming soil, becoming mountain, becoming the very concept of below. She was stability in a reality that had never known structure. With her came Tartarus, the abyss beneath all things. Not hell as later ages would imagine, but depth without measure. A pit so absolute that even fear would hesitate to descend into it. And then came Eros, not the gentle winged boy of later art, not romance, not tenderness. This was the binding force. Attraction, compulsion, the invisible gravity that pulls all things toward one another. Without Eros, nothing would touch, nothing would join, nothing would create. And from these first presences emerged others. Nyx, night, endless and enveloping. Erebus, the shadow that clings to the edges of existence. The universe had not yet formed. and already it carried mystery. Already it carried darkness. Already it carried the tension between creation and oblivion. This world was not born from logic. It was born from pressure, from force, from inevitability. Gaia, vast and solitary, then brought forth Uranus, the sky. He rose above her not as a man with limbs, but as canopy, as atmosphere, as infinite height studded with cold, burning stars. If Gaia was foundation, Uranus was expanse. Together, earth and sky formed the first union. But their intimacy was not tender. Uranus did not hover gently above Gaia. He pressed against her, covered her, enclosed her. It was closeness without warmth. And from their union came children, not soft, not fragile, but elemental. First, the Titans, 12 in number, massive, radiant, terrible. Each embodied an aspect of existence itself: time, memory, light, ocean, law. They were not yet the Olympians. They were older, more raw. Then came the Cyclopes, giants with a single blazing eye, beings of volcanic power and primal craftsmanship. From their hands would one day come thunder itself. And finally, the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones, 50 heads, 100 arms each, strength beyond imagination. They were not symmetrical, not harmonious. They were overwhelming, and Uranus looked upon them and feared their strength, feared their difference, feared the possibility that they might one day reshape the world without him. And so he did what tyrants always do when confronted with potential they cannot control. He buried it. He forced the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones deep into Gaia's body, pressed them into Tartarus, sealed them in darkness. He denied them sky, denied them light, denied them existence. And Gaia, Mother, Earth, foundation of all, groaned, not only in pain, but in outrage. Her womb had become a prison, her children entombed within her flesh. Her cries trembled through the unformed cosmos, and from grief came resolve. In secret she shaped a weapon, an adamantine sickle, curved, jagged, unbreakable. A blade not forged in fire, but in fury. She brought it to her Titan sons, and she asked a question no child should be asked. Who among you will rise against your father? Silence answered her at first. Fear is powerful, even among immortals. But one stepped forward, Cronus, youngest of the Titans, most patient, most calculating. He did not step forward out of love. He stepped forward out of ambition, and perhaps resentment. One night, when Uranus descended once more to press himself upon Gaia, Cronus rose from hiding. The blade flashed, and heaven screamed. With one merciless stroke, Cronus severed his father's power. The sky recoiled, blood fell upon the earth, and from that divine violence sprang new horrors. The Furies, embodiments of vengeance. The giants, towering and defiant. And from the sea foam where blood met water, Aphrodite, born not of romance, but of rupture. Cronus stood victorious. But victory is a mirror, and in overthrowing tyranny, he inherited it. Uranus, fading into silence, did not bless his son. He prophesied, "As you have done to me, so shall be done to you." The cycle had begun, and blood remembers. Cronus took the throne of the cosmos. Beside him stood Rhea, his sister, his queen. For a time, there was peace. The Golden Age, they would later call it. But peace purchased through violence carries rot within it. Cronus ruled, outwardly calm, inwardly haunted. Because prophecy does not fade. It echoes. And when Rhea bore their first child, Cronus did not see an infant. He saw threat. He saw the future sharpening its blade. And so he swallowed the child. Whole. Alive. He called it prudence. He called it protection. But it was fear. And one by one, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each newborn met not cradle, but darkness. Each cry ended in silence within their father's body. Rhea endured. At first, her sorrow buried beneath royal composure, her fury ripening in silence. The Titans watched, and did nothing, because fear, once enthroned, spreads quickly. Some whispered that Cronus was wise, that kings must be ruthless, that mercy is weakness. But somewhere deep within Gaia's ancient bones, the earth remembered. The cycle was turning again, and this time, it would not end quietly. Some Titans could not bear to watch. Others, like Oceanus, ancient river that circled the world, withdrew from the tightening coils of Olympus. He retreated to the outermost edges of his dominion, to waters so distant that even the echoes of prophecy arrived softened and late. There, beyond the tremor of thrones and the whisper of conspiracies, he chose stillness over allegiance. He had seen one king fall. He would not gamble himself on another. But Gaia did not retreat. She did not forget. The earth never forgets. She felt the weight of what was happening, not as a physical burden this time, but as a gathering storm beneath her crust. Once, she had groaned because her children were imprisoned in her body. Now she trembled for a different reason. She had outlived Uranus. She was watching Cronus, and she had begun to understand that kings, no matter how mighty, are brief interruptions in a world that is eternal. When Rhea conceived again, when the fifth pregnancy swelled beneath her ribs, she did not go to her husband. She did not seek counsel among Titans whose courage had long since withered into caution. She turned downward. She turned to Gaia, to the first mother, to the earth that remembers. Gaia, who had once forged the sickle that unmade the sky, now offered something subtler than a blade. Not steel, not violence, deception, hope. Weapons far more dangerous. When the time came, Rhea did not labor beneath Olympus' gilded ceilings. She fled in secrecy to a cavern carved into the cliffs of Mount Dicte on the rugged island of Crete. The winds there howled like restless spirits. The stone walls whispered with salt and age. It was a place where even Titan's eyes struggled to pierce the shadows. There, beneath stone and secrecy, she bore her sixth child. A son. She named him Zeus. A small name then, a fragile sound in a dark cave. But one day, that name would split the sky. When Cronus came, as he always did, expecting to claim what he believed destiny demanded, Rhea did not tremble. She wrapped a jagged stone in swaddling cloth. Rough, silent, unbreathing, she placed it in his hands. And Cronus, blinded by habit and fear, did not look. He swallowed, as he had swallowed the others, as he believed he would swallow fate itself. With that single act of unexamined terror, he sealed his own undoing. Zeus did not grow beneath marble columns. He did not learn at the feet of kings. He was raised in silence. Nymphs fed him honey and goat's milk. The goat Amalthea bent low to nourish him. The Curetes, warrior spirits clad in bronze, clashed shields and stamped their feet in wild, frenzied dance whenever the child cried, masking his voice from the heavens above. He grew among stone and wind. He learned patience from mountains. He learned endurance from caves. He learned silence before he learned speech. And as he grew, so did something older than him. Fate. It coiled quietly around Olympus. Cronus ruled, unaware that he sat upon a throne built over a fracture. Inside his own body, his swallowed children remained suspended, not dead, not living as mortals understand it, locked within divine stasis, trapped within the flesh of their father. A prison of muscle and godhood. He believed this was wisdom. He believed this was control. He did not understand that you cannot digest prophecy. The golden age endured, radiant in appearance. Rivers ran clear. Fields were generous. The sky remained unmarred by storm. But beneath abundance there was tension. A hush clung to the roots of trees. A murmur lingered in the wind. The earth watched. Rhea endured. Zeus grew. And Cronus, enthroned atop swallowed futures, never once sensed that the future was already walking toward him. He ruled from Olympus with an iron stillness. His court shimmered with marble and gold. Titans moved through its halls with controlled reverence, their voices low, their gazes carefully measured. None spoke openly of the children. None dared. But silence has texture, and this silence was heavy. Every time Rhea labored, Cronus came not as a father, but as an executioner of possibility. Hestia vanished first, goddess of hearthfire who never saw flame. Demeter followed, nourisher of fields who never touched soil. Hera, fierce and destined for a crown of her own, disappeared like breath in winter air. Hades, Poseidon, each swallowed, each silenced. Cronus told himself that this was strength, that kings must be merciless, that destiny could be consumed like meat and rendered powerless within the gut of a god. But the difference between a prison of stone and a prison of flesh is only superficial. To those imprisoned, it is still darkness. In the corners of Olympus, whispers coiled like smoke. Cronus issued commands with finality. His word was law. Yet beneath his authority lived a subtle madness, a paranoia spreading like rot behind palace walls. He feared sleep. He feared dreams of infants crying. He feared reflections in still water. Most of all, he feared memory, because he remembered what he had done. And somewhere in his mind, he knew what that meant. He had once been the sun in shadow. He had once risen against a tyrant. And now he waited for the same shadow to rise behind him. Rhea said nothing. Her sorrow hardened into something quieter, something sharper. She sat beside him in court, composed and serene, every inch the obedient queen. But beneath her calm exterior burned a secret, small, fierce, alive. A child in a cave, an ember wrapped in cloth. Every time Cronus passed her with furrowed brow and restless gaze, she allowed herself the faintest smile, because she knew what he did not. The prophecy was not swallowed. It was growing. Zeus came of age in secrecy. He did not inherit comfort. He inherited knowledge. He knew he had been hidden. He knew his siblings had been devoured. He knew his mother had lied to a king to save him. He learned not to rush, not to boast, not to reveal himself too soon. He listened to the wind. He studied the rhythm of things. He watched how storms gathered before they broke. And when the hour came, when inevitability hardened into decision, he did not hesitate. He climbed toward Olympus, not as a beggar, not as a servant, but as a son long denied. Cronus, never fully at peace, sensed disturbance before he understood it. He saw a young man approach, strong, steady, unafraid. But he did not recognize his own reflection. Perhaps he had forgotten what his children's faces might have looked like. Perhaps prophecy always arrives wearing unfamiliar features. Zeus did not kneel. He did not offer tribute. He brought reckoning. And as he stood before the king who had swallowed his blood, something ancient stirred once more. The cycle was ready to turn again, not with fanfare, not with proclamation, but with the quiet, irreversible certainty that no throne, no matter how golden, can outlast the truth it tries to consume. Or perhaps it was not ignorance that blinded Cronus. Perhaps it was fear, the same fear that had once curled inside him like smoke beneath the ribs, the fear that had driven him to swallow his children whole, believing that destiny could be crushed between his teeth and dissolved in the acid of his gut. But fate is not flesh. It cannot be digested. It waits. Zeus stood before him, not trembling, not shouting, not accusing. Calm, almost gentle. In his hands he carried a cup, a simple gesture, an offering. Inside it was no ordinary draught, but a mixture of divine bile and ancient cunning. Knowledge distilled from whispers older than Olympus, learned in shadows, guided by Gaia herself and those titans who had begun to sense that the age of Cronus was already ending. Cronus drank as he always had, without question, without doubt. He believed he consumed power. He believed he mastered what he touched. He believed control was a thing one could swallow. Then his throat burned. His vision fractured. The king staggered. The king choked. and the king vomited. One by one, from the depths of his imprisoned body, his children emerged, not as the helpless infants he had devoured, but as gods fully formed. Hestia stepped forward first, serene, steady, her presence warm yet unyielding. Demeter followed, earth-scented and resolute, eyes heavy with the memory of darkness. Hera rose regal and terrible, already crowned in fury. Hades emerged silent and shadowed, gazed deep as the abyss he would one day rule. Poseidon burst forth last among them, wild and restless, the sea already echoing in his breath. They did not cry. They did not thank him. They did not mourn. They stood shoulder to shoulder beside Zeus. 6 children of Cronus. Not a family. An army. What followed was no mortal war. It was not fought for land, nor glory, nor simple vengeance. It was a war of ages. A collision between what had been and what demanded to be. The Titanomachy. 10 years, they would later say, but time then was fluid, unfinished, measured not by calendars but by catastrophe. Days were counted in collapsing mountains. Seasons were marked by oceans boiling and skies cracking apart. Zeus led with thunder in his fists. His voice shook the firmament. Poseidon tore rivers from their beds and hurled tidal fury across Titan's strongholds. Hades split the earth itself, drawing shadows upward like living weapons. And Cronus, once the bold usurper, now the besieged king, summoned his Titan kin, the ancient rulers of memory, stone, and time. At first, the Titans held firm. They were older, stronger. Their dominion stretched across every natural force. Their rage was not wild but enduring, cold as winter, patient as erosion. But they lacked unity. They fought from obligation, from pride, from fear of losing what they had grown too comfortable possessing. Cronus fought desperately, not for vision, not for a future, but for survival. Some Titans saw the inevitable shift. Themis, wise and measured, understood the tilt of fate. Prometheus, cunning and far-seeing, recognized that the world ahead would not belong to those clinging to yesterday. They defected. They lent their insight to Zeus, because even immortals can sense when the tide cannot be reversed. The turning point came from the depths. At Gaia's urging, Zeus descended into Tartarus, the abyss beneath all light, and shattered the chains of the Centimanes, the 100-handed giants buried long ago by Uranus. Beside them, the Cyclopes emerged, one-eyed smiths who had not seen the sun since the dawn of creation. Forgotten, chained, punished for existing, they rose now with a fury that shook the underworld. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged weapons worthy of a new era. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, condensed lightning, sharpened sky. For Poseidon, the trident, capable of rending oceans and splitting continents. For Hades, the helm of shadow, rendering him unseen, a whisper in the battlefield's chaos. The Centimanes, with their 100 arms, hurled mountains like stones. They shattered Titan defenses beneath storms of rock and steel. The earth groaned beneath their assault. And then came the final confrontation. It was fought upon plains that would one day be called Thessaly. But in that age, names had not yet settled upon the land. The sky darkened into a vault of flame. Lightning split reality into shards. Oceans rose and collapsed in single breaths. Fire burst from the earth, only to be swallowed by wind. Zeus stood at the center, cloaked in stormlight, hurling thunder with terrible precision. Cronus met him there, not as father to son, but as king to storm. Their clash shattered what little structure remained. Sky and stone screamed as their power collided. Cronus fought with the weight of ages behind him. Zeus fought with inevitability. When it ended, Cronus did not die. He fell, broken, bound, cast into Tartarus alongside his loyal Titan kin, chained behind gates of adamantine, guarded by the very monsters his father had once imprisoned. There was no mercy, no clemency. The old gods were buried where no light could reach, and the cosmos exhaled. Zeus and his siblings stood amid smoking ruin. There was no cheering, no celebration, only silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm, so immense the world must relearn how to breathe. The spoils were divided, the heavens to Zeus, the seas to Poseidon, the underworld to Hades. The earth itself remained unclaimed, shared, contested, alive. The Titans imprisoned, the Centaurs stationed as wardens, the Cyclopes returned to their forges. Thus ended the reign of Titans. Thus began the age of Olympians. But the world had not been remade. It had been seized. The wounds of war did not fade quickly. The air still smelled of lightning. Mountains bore scars like claw marks across their faces. The sea trembled as if remembering violence. The Olympians had not inherited peace. They had inherited aftermath. Zeus ascended above the clouds, not because he was beloved, not because he was gentle, but because he was storm itself. He claimed the heavens. His voice became law. His anger became legend. Poseidon ruled the sea, proud and volatile, its tides answering to his moods. Hades descended willingly into shadow, not as exile, but as sovereign of inevitability. Olympus rose as their fortress, marble and cloud, unreachable by mortal hands. And yet, beneath this new order, cracks formed. Because Zeus remembered. He remembered Cronus choking. He remembered Uranus' dying curse. He remembered prophecy. And prophecy does not die with kings. Whispers crept back into the corners of Olympus. One day Zeus too would fall, not by a stranger's blade, but by blood of his own blood, a child greater than the father, unborn, waiting. Zeus, mightier than Cronus, louder than the sky itself, was still a son who had once raised a poisoned cup. He understood the pattern, and he swore, silently, fiercely, that he would not allow it to repeat. But history, like fate, has a way of listening, and the story of the gods was far from finished. Not again. The thought did not thunder through Zeus like lightning. It whispered, it coiled, it lingered in the back of his mind like an echo he could never quite silence. He had overthrown his father. He had broken the Titans. He had buried monsters beneath mountains. But he had not broken the pattern. And so when he took his first wife, Métis, embodiment of wisdom, cunning incarnate, whose thoughts curved and twisted like rivers carving stone, he did so not as a lover, but as a strategist. She was not taken in war. She was not subdued. She stood as his equal in mind. Zeus admired her, sought her counsel, valued her perception. Métis could see around corners of fate others did not even know existed. Her mind rivaled the fates themselves. And that, perhaps, was the problem. When the oracles whispered their warning, that Métis would bear him a daughter wise beyond measure, and then a son greater than his father, a child destined to overthrow him and end the Olympian age, Zeus did not rage. He did not hesitate. He remembered Cronus. He remembered the choking. And so Zeus opened his mouth and swallowed Métis whole. Not from cruelty, from fear. The same fear that had once driven Cronus to devour him. The same logic, the same mistake. Uranus had buried his monstrous sons in stone. Cronus had buried his children in flesh. Now Zeus buried wisdom in himself. Kings change. Patterns do not. But fate is not a creature that suffocates easily. It is not a bird that can be caged or a whisper that can be swallowed. Fate is a river beneath the bedrock of existence. You may dam it, you may divert it, but it remembers its course. Inside Zeus, Métis did not perish. She endured. She whispered. She forged. Within the cavern of his skull, she worked in silence. And then came the pain, not rebellion from without, rebellion from within, a splitting agony behind his eyes, a pressure like continents grinding together inside his mind. No god could soothe it. No nectar dulled it. Zeus, king of heaven, roared in torment. At last, desperate, he summoned Hephaestus. With hammer and axe, the god of the forge struck Zeus' skull. The blow cracked the heavens. And from that fracture burst prophecy fulfilled. Athena, born not of womb, but of mind, clad in armor, radiant with wisdom, sword already drawn. She did not scream. She did not stumble. She emerged fully formed, steady as thought itself, a goddess of strategy and war, a child of intellect and power intertwined. She stood before Zeus and bowed. No rebellion, no uprising. For a time, Zeus believed he had won. There was no son, no usurper. He had bent prophecy to his will, or so he told himself. But fate is patient, and the earth remembers. From beneath the bones of the world, from a depth older than Titans, older even than Gaia's first stirring, came a tremor. Not a roar, not yet, a pressure, a vibration in the marrow of existence. Gaia, wounded by the war against her Titan sons, had birthed one final vengeance. Typhon, not merely a monster, a catastrophe given form. He rose with serpents for legs, coiling around mountains. His wings blotted out the sun. 100 voices shrieked from his throats in languages no living thing could survive hearing. His breath was smoke. His eyes were molten hate. Even the Olympians fled at first. Gods who had shattered Titans now retreated, weapons slipping from hands and used to true terror. Only Zeus remained. The battle between Zeus and Typhon did not unfold within time. It fractured it. Rivers evaporated into steam. Forests ignited into ash. Stars fell screaming from the sky. Continents trembled. Typhon hurled mountains like stones. Zeus answered with storms that split the heavens open. Lightning met flame. Wind met venom. Chaos met thunder. It was not skill that prevailed. It was wrath. Pure, relentless, unyielding divine fury. In the end, Zeus cast Typhon down, crushing him beneath Mount Etna. Even now, the volcano breathes fire from the monster's buried rage. And in that victory, Zeus proved something terrible. He was not merely king. He was the storm itself. But victory did not bring peace. The sky felt thinner. The earth felt weary. Zeus had swallowed a wife. He had cracked his own skull. He had battled a horror older than fear. And still prophecy lingered. The pattern was not finished. Power, once secured, seeks control. Zeus looked downward, at mortals, fragile creatures crawling across the earth's surface. Brief lives, frail bodies, minds flickering like distant stars. They were no threat. Not yet. But Zeus had learned that threats are born from what might become. And so he limited them. He denied them fire, that sacred spark stolen from the heart of heaven. Flame that warms, forges, cooks, transforms. Fire was divine. It belonged to gods, to stars, to immortal craft. In mortal hands, fire was a ladder, and ladders threatened thrones. So Zeus decreed humanity would live in cold darkness, feeding on raw flesh, huddling in caves, perishing in unforgiving winters. He watched them shiver, and called it balance. But Prometheus did not, a Titan by birth, a rebel by foresight. He had not fought for Cronus. He had watched the Titanomachy with calculating eyes. He was not storm or sea. He was thought. He had shaped mankind from clay, had given them language, reason, curiosity. He loved them not as subjects, but as creations. And when he saw them suffering, not from weakness, but from divine restriction, he acted. One night, cloaked in shadow, Prometheus ascended Olympus. He moved like wind through marble halls. He entered the forge of Hephaestus, and he stole fire, a single ember, hidden within a hollow fennel stalk, carried from heaven to earth like a heartbeat of rebellion. When he placed it in human hands, he saw something ignite beyond flame. Hope. The fire spread. Caves became hearths. Raw flesh became nourishment. Darkness retreated. Humans forged bronze, built homes, told stories around glowing coals. They carved tools, tamed beasts, lit beacons that rivaled stars. They rose faster than the gods anticipated, And Zeus watched, not enraged by theft, enraged by success. The fire had not destroyed them. It had awakened them. Zeus summoned Prometheus, offered him the chance to kneel, to repent, to beg. Prometheus did not kneel. He spoke calmly, told Zeus that the world belonged not only to immortals, but to mortals, that humanity, though brief, could achieve greatness beyond divine imagination. Zeus listened. When Prometheus finished, the king of heaven said nothing. He simply nodded. Guards seized the Titan. They dragged him to the edge of the world, to a mountain whose peak pierced bleeding clouds. There they chained him, naked, alone. Adamantine shackles bound his limbs, and Zeus did not grant him death. Each morning, an eagle descended, its talons black as judgment. It tore open Prometheus' belly and devoured his liver. Each night, the organ regenerated, and each dawn, the punishment began anew. Not for rebellion, not for war, but for compassion. Thus the age of Olympus continued. Storm above, suffering below, and beneath it all, the quiet truth Zeus could never silence. Power is never secure. Prophecy is never gone. And the fire he tried to contain was no longer only in heaven. It burned now in mortal hands. And each night, when the sun bled itself beneath the curve of the horizon and shadows reclaimed the mountain, Prometheus' torn flesh would knit itself back together. Sinew reformed, bone sealed. The liver grew whole again, raw, tender, waiting. There was no mercy in the rhythm, no sleep deep enough to dull it, no death to end it, only repetition, pain measured not in screams, but in endurance. And through it all, Prometheus did not beg. He did not curse Zeus. He did not plead for release. He endured in silence, for he had given humanity fire. And somewhere far below that lonely peak, he knew the flame still burned in mortal hands. He knew they were building, forging, learning. He knew that memory would outlive punishment. But Zeus was not finished. Prometheus suffered, but mankind still prospered. Their hearths glowed. Their songs grew louder. Their tools sharpened. So Zeus chose a different weapon. Not thunder, not flood, not plague. A gift. If force could not break them, perhaps beauty would. He summoned Hephaestus, divine smith of Olympus, and commanded him to shape a woman from earth and grace. Clay was molded, breath was given, and one by one, the gods approached to add their offerings. Aphrodite brushed her with irresistible charm. Athena granted her deft hands and clever skill. Hermes laced her tongue with persuasion and subtle deceit. Apollo wove music into her voice. Each god left a fragment of divinity within her. She was radiant, dazzling, a masterpiece of intention. She was named Pandora, all gifted. But she was not a blessing. She was a strategy. In her hand she carried a sealed jar, though some would later call it a box, commanded never to open it. She was delivered to Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought. Prometheus had warned him, accept nothing from Zeus. But loneliness dulls caution. Desire silences wisdom. Epimetheus saw not a weapon but wonder, and he welcomed her. Pandora smiled. She sang. She learned the rhythms of mortal life. But among the many gifts placed inside her was curiosity. Whether flaw or design, no one could say. The jar called to her, not with words, with weight, with presence, with the unbearable tension of the forbidden. One day, unable to resist, she lifted the lid, and the world exhaled its darkness. From the jar poured sorrow, disease that rots the body from within, grief that hollows the heart, jealousy that poisons love, famine that starves hope, madness that fractures thought, war, old age, death. They spilled out like smoke from a shattered furnace, spreading across the earth in a black tide. Men who had sung around fires now wept beside graves. Women who had danced in harvest fields now buried children beneath cold soil. The flame Prometheus had given them still burned, but now it cast shadows. The gods watched, some with triumph, some with regret. Zeus watched with cold satisfaction as humanity bent beneath the weight of suffering. Fire had made them rise. Pain would make them kneel. Yet not everything escaped. At the bottom of the jar, unnoticed in the chaos, something remained. Small, flickering, fragile as breath on winter air. Pandora, trembling at what she had unleashed, looked inside once more. Hope. She opened the jar again, and hope slipped free. It did not roar. It did not blaze. It drifted quietly into the world like an ember carried on wind. It could not undo sorrow. It could not erase death. But it endured. And wherever despair took root, hope grew beside it. Stubborn, silent, unyielding. The age shifted. Mortals now carried both fire and suffering. They walked upright, thinking, creating, and mourning. The gods had ensured humanity would never rise too swiftly, but they had also ensured mankind would never again bow in blind fear. The world had hardened, but it had also become worth fighting for. Olympus ruled from above, yet the mortal world below no longer felt like clay in immortal hands. The gods had tasted rebellion. They had seen prophecy twist. They had watched fire ignite in fragile beings, and boredom crept into divinity. They descended more often, not for justice, for desire, for amusement, for pride. When gods walked among mortals, the world changed. Not always in ruin, not always in blessing, but always in blood, divine blood. Children were born of impossible unions, of sky and soil, thunder and bone. They were not fully mortal, not fully divine. They did not sit upon Olympus, yet neither did they fade like ordinary men. They were called heroes, but in those days, hero meant something harsher. A hero was not a savior. A hero was a force, a storm given flesh. They were born in secrecy, raised in exile, shaped by prophecy, sent into a world already fractured by divine wars and scarred by vengeance. They did not seek peace. They sought purpose, and the world offered monsters enough. Perseus was among the first whose name survived the ages. Born to Danae, a mortal princess imprisoned in bronze by her father, King Achilles. An oracle had warned the king, "Your daughter's son will be your doom." So he locked her away beneath the earth. But fate does not respect walls. Zeus came to Danae not as a man, but as golden light. He slipped through cracks in the chamber, and left her with child. When Achilles discovered the infant, he did not spill blood directly. Cowardice often hides behind distance. He sealed mother and child in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea. Let the ocean decide, but the sea chose mercy. The chest drifted to the island of Seriphos. Perseus grew not in palaces, but among fishermen and hardened kings. Salt air in his lungs, prophecy heavy on his shoulders. The gods watched him. Athena whispered in dreams. Hermes followed from afar. When a tyrant king demanded an impossible gift, the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, Perseus accepted. Not because he believed he would survive, but because heroes are forged in impossible demands. The gods armed him, winged sandals to cross impossible distances, a mirrored shield to avoid her deadly gaze, a blade sharp enough to sever curse from flesh, a helm of invisibility to vanish from sight. He journeyed through lands twisted by time, through caverns where whispers clung to stone, through places where sleep brought visions of blood. At last he found Medusa, once a priestess of Athena, punished, transformed into a monster after being violated in a sacred temple. She slept, her serpent hair coiled like a crown of grief. Her sisters stirred in the dark. Perseus did not look at her directly. He watched her reflection in the shield, and with a single stroke, he severed her head. Blood struck the earth in violent arcs. From her neck sprang Pegasus, winged and radiant, and Chrysaor, born armed. From her death came legend. Perseus carried the head, its eyes still open, still lethal. He saved Andromeda from a sea monster, claimed kingdoms, turned tyrants to stone. Victory followed victory, yet prophecy waited. Years later, Perseus returned unknowingly to Argos. Achilles, still afraid, had fled to Larissa. There, during athletic games, Perseus threw a discus. A simple act, youthful pride, a twist of fate. The discus veered, struck an old man in the crowd, killed him instantly. The old man was Achilles. No blade, no vengeance, no intent. And still, the prophecy was fulfilled. Delayed, diverted, but never escaped. Because in the world of gods and men alike, fate does not forget. And so the tale of Perseus settled into memory, not as a triumph of justice, not as a saga of vengeance, but as a single golden thread woven into a tapestry far older than any king. He had slain monsters. He had rescued the condemned. He had founded cities and crowned dynasties. Yet the act that fulfilled his destiny had not been chosen. It had been accidental, a discus thrown in youth, a life ended in dust, a prophecy completed not with fury, but with inevitability. Perseus ruled. He built. His children spread across the Greek world like seeds cast on wind. Yet he carried with him a quiet knowledge. Even those favored by the gods are pieces upon a board too vast to see. He had borrowed glory, and like all borrowed things, it would one day be returned. The world was shifting. The boundary between mortal and immortal had begun to thin. Perseus walked that fragile line with the dignity of a man who understood something terrible and true. All stories, no matter how radiant, end in silence. After Perseus, the world remembered the shape of greatness. His name passed from hearth to hearth, carried in smoke and breath. Bards sang of him before battle. Mothers whispered of him to restless sons. No two tellings were ever the same, but all agreed on one thing. A child born of God and woman could rise, could defy horror, could shape kingdoms. The veil had been torn, and through that tear poured others, not born merely of prophecy, but of ambition, of hunger, of the refusal to live and die unnoticed. Heroes began to rise like sparks struck from stone. Among them, Theseus. He was called the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, or perhaps the son of Poseidon. It depended on which bard you believed. He was not marked by lightning at birth. No serpents tested him in his cradle. No prophecy thundered over his name. He was simply clever, sharp, ruthless when necessary, and in that age, that was often enough. His youth unfolded quietly in treason under the watch of his mother, Aethra. Far from courtly intrigue, far from crowns, but blood remembers. And when Theseus came of age, he learned the truth. Beneath a great stone, his father had hidden a sword and sandals. A test, a legacy. If the boy could lift the stone, he was ready. Theseus did not hesitate. He strained. The stone shifted, and with it his life. He chose not the sea, the path of princes. He chose the road, a road thick with violence, bandits, killers, would-be kings. The countryside was a broken thing, crawling with cruelty, and Theseus walked straight into it. He met Periphetes, the club-bearer, and crushed him. He found Cenes, who bent travelers between pine trees, and broke him by his own method. He hurled Sciron to the man-eating turtles he once fed with victims. He did not cleanse the road with mercy. He mirrored its brutality. Each corpse left behind was a message carved into stone. Theseus passed here. By the time he reached Athens, he was no longer a boy claiming inheritance. He was a storm arriving at the gates. Yet Athens was no simple prize. King Aegeus sat uneasy upon his throne, tangled in paranoia and spellcraft. Beside him stood Medea, sorceress, exile, survivor. She saw Theseus not as a son returned, but as a threat, and as all who fear the future do, she sought to poison it before it could rise. She prepared a cup, deadly, silent, but at the final moment, Theseus revealed his sword, his lineage, his proof. Recognition struck Aegeus like lightning. The cup fell. Medea fled in fury. Athens accepted Theseus, not with warmth, but with awe, and soon he learned of the city's shame. Crete, King Minos, the tribute. Every 9 years, Athens sent 7 young men and 7 maidens to their deaths. They were cast into the labyrinth beneath Knossos, an endless maze of stone and despair. At its heart lurked the Minotaur, half man, half bull, born of curse and divine punishment, raised not as a child, but as a symbol of humiliation. Theseus did not wait to be chosen. He volunteered. He sailed to Crete among the doomed. Silent, watching, there he met Ariadne, daughter of Minos. She did not fall for his beauty. She fell for his defiance, for the promise that the cycle could break. She gave him a thread, simple, sacred, a path back through darkness. The labyrinth swallowed him whole. The air was thick with rot and memory. The walls seemed alive with whispers of the lost. At the center waited the Minotaur, not roaring, not charging, but breathing, a creature shaped by cruelty. They fought without ceremony, steel against horn, flesh against fury. It was not glorious. It was desperate. Theseus killed it not as a knight slaying evil, but as a man ending a nightmare. The beast fell in its own prison, its blood-soaking stone that had never known mercy. Guided by thread, Theseus led the youths back to light, back to sea, back to hope. A savior. But the gods do not forget, and neither does the sea. On the journey home, Ariadne was left behind on Naxos. Whether abandoned by cold choice or divine interference, none can say. She awoke alone, her thread useless, her faith broken. Dionysus would later claim her and raise her among the stars. But Theseus carried the stain of abandonment, and when his ship neared Athens, he forgot, or failed, to change the black sails to white, the signal of survival. Aegeus watched from the cliffs, saw black against sky, believed his son dead. In grief, he leapt into the sea. The waters swallowed him, and took his name, the Aegean. Theseus returned to a throne crowned not with celebration, but mourning. He unified Attica. He strengthened Athens. But greatness is not goodness. He kidnapped Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, bore a son by her, later married Phaedra, Ariadne's sister, and through jealousy, accusation, and curse, his own son, Hippolytus, was destroyed. His rule endured, but it rotted at the edges. Ambition that once forged him now poisoned him. In the end, he died far from home, exiled, forgotten, thrown from a cliff by a former ally. No thunder marked his passing, no monument rose. The storm had passed, and the world moved on. Perseus, Theseus, Bellerophon, Cadmus, each walked the same road, born of God and woman, tasked with impossible feats, rising beyond mortal limits, only to fall. Their endings were rarely peaceful. Silence, madness, exile, because the world they inhabited did not reward greatness. It consumed it, used it, and discarded it, yet their names endured, not because they were virtuous, not because they were kind, but because they were necessary. In a world still stalked by monsters, someone had to stand between terror and survival. They were not the best of men, but they were the strongest, and for a time, that was enough. Before Troy burned, before Achilles dragged Hector's body through dust, before Odysseus wandered 10 long years upon unforgiving seas, there was Heracles, the strongest of men, the most tormented of heroes, the only mortal who clawed his way into Olympus, not through inheritance, not through mercy, but through suffering so immense, and strength so relentless, that even the gods were forced to acknowledge him. He was not clever like Odysseus, Not regal like Agamemnon, not calculating like Theseus. His heart was neither especially tender nor cruel. He was something simpler, more dangerous. He was a weapon shaped by the world, too powerful for peace, too noble for oblivion. He was born in Thebes, to Alcmene and Zeus, who once more descended not as thunder, but as deception, taking the form of her husband, sharing her bed, leaving behind a child heavy with heaven's blood. Hera discovered the betrayal. As she always did, her fury did not strike Zeus. It never did. It struck the child, the innocent. From his first breath, Hera marked him. She delayed his birth so that Eurystheus, weak, petty, unworthy, would claim the throne destined for Heracles. She sent serpents into his cradle, 2 coiling deaths in the dark. But the infant did not cry. He grasped them and crushed them in his fists. Even then, even as a babe, he refused to die quietly, and the gods understood. The storm had arrived, but Heracles did not die in his cradle. The serpents Hera had sent slid across the stone floor in the dark, their scales whispering against marble, their fangs dripping with divine venom. They coiled around the infant's limbs, tightening, confident in the fragility of flesh. And the child awoke. He did not scream. He did not cry for milk or mother. Tiny fingers closed around scaled throats, and he squeezed. The serpents writhed, their bodies snapping and twisting, until their bones gave way like brittle branches under frost. When the nursemaids rushed in, they found the infant laughing softly, 2 lifeless coils clutched in his hands. Even then, the world understood. This was not an ordinary child. This was something forged for struggle. He grew vast, not merely tall, not merely strong, but immense. By adolescence, he could split oak trunks with his hands. He hunted lions alone before he had grown a beard. His footsteps seemed heavier than other men's, as though the earth felt the weight of Zeus in his blood. He trained in every discipline available to a prince: spear, sword, bow. He learned wrestling, strategy, horsemanship. Tutors attempted to teach him music and philosophy. He tried to shape melodies with careful fingers, but the lyre looked strange in his hands, jewelry on a butcher. He learned, he listened, but the world had not shaped him for softness. He married young. Megara, noble, gentle, steady. She bore him children, and for a brief season, brief as dawn in winter, Heracles knew something like peace. He laughed. He carried his sons upon his shoulders. He walked without blood on his hands. But peace was never part of Hera's design. Madness came quietly, not as thunder, not as lightning. It crept, a whisper at first, a shadow bending at the edge of sight. Hera clouded his mind so thoroughly that the line between reality and nightmare dissolved. Laughter sounded like mockery. Footsteps sounded like marching enemies. The warm glow of hearthlight flickered like the flames of war. He saw threats in the faces of his own children. He heard battle cries where there were only lullabies. And in a night of confusion and firelight, Heracles slaughtered them. His wife, his sons, steel rising and falling in blind fury. When the madness lifted, dawn revealed what darkness had hidden. Bodies, silence, smoke rising from a house that would never again know warmth. There was no enemy to blame, no battlefield to justify it, only ruin. He had not been defeated by a rival. He had been broken by a god. He might have taken his own life. Many would have, but fate had not yet finished with him. The oracle at Delphi spoke. There was a path, not to peace, not to forgetfulness, but to something that resembled redemption. He would serve Eurystheus, the weak king who had stolen his birthright, the petty ruler whose name would have meant nothing without Heracles bound to it. He would obey every command, no matter how humiliating, no matter how deadly. Thus began the 12 labors, not designed to cleanse him, designed to destroy him. The first was the Nemean lion, a beast whose hide no blade could pierce. Hunters had died screaming in its jaws. Villages emptied at its approach. Heracles tracked it to its cave. He loosed arrows, they snapped. He struck with sword, it glanced away uselessly. So he cast aside his weapons, closed his hands around its throat, and squeezed. The lion clawed and bit and tore at his flesh. But Heracles did not loosen his grip. He strangled it, took its hide using its own claws, draped it over his shoulders. The head became his helm. From that day forward, he wore brutality as armor. Then came the Lernaean Hydra, nine-headed serpent of the swamps. Cut one head, two grew back. Its blood smoked against the air. Its breath blackened grass. Heracles fought in mud and rot, each strike answered by multiplication. Realizing brute force alone would fail, he called for flame. As he severed each neck, he cauterized the stump with fire. No regrowth, no second chance. When the final immortal head remained, he severed and buried it beneath stone. He dipped his arrows in its venom. From then on, even a scratch from his bow would mean death, because strength alone was not enough. A hero without weapons is merely a target. He diverted rivers to cleanse the Augean stables in a single day, washing away decades of filth with raw force and cleverness combined. He chased the Ceryneian hind for a year, through mountains, across snowfields, refusing to wound what was sacred to Artemis, capturing it only when endurance overcame speed. He drove the Erymanthian boar into drifts too deep to escape. He shattered the Stymphalian birds with poisoned arrows and bronze noise. He subdued the Cretan bull, tamed the flesh-eating mares of Diomedes, claimed the girdle of Hippolyta through battle and negotiation alike. Each labor heavier than the last, each victory hollow. He journeyed to the far west to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides. Guarded by a dragon that never slept, he did not slay it. He found Atlas instead, the titan holding the sky. Heracles offered to bear the heavens while Atlas retrieved the apples. For a moment, he stood beneath the crushing weight of existence itself, the sky pressing into his shoulders, the stars grinding into his spine. When Atlas returned and attempted to abandon him to eternity, Heracles smiled, asked for a moment to adjust his cloak, and when the burden shifted back, he walked away with the apples. Strength was power, but wit ensured survival. The final labor was the darkest. Descend into Hades. Return with Cerberus, three-headed guardian of the dead. No mortal had entered and come back. Heracles did not hesitate. He walked into shadow, past spirits whispering regret, past shades of those he had slain, past the memory of his own children's faces in the gloom. He stood before Hades and asked, not demanded, asked. The god agreed, if Heracles subdued the beast without weapons. And so he wrestled Cerberus in darkness, teeth snapping, claws raking, three jaws lunging. He did not kill it. He mastered it, dragged it into sunlight, and returned it unharmed. The labors ended, but suffering did not. He returned a legend, but legends are prisons. He wandered, fought wars for kings who feared him, built cities he would not inhabit, fathered children he rarely watched grow. The world cheered the lion's skin, the poisoned arrows, but no one saw the hollow inside him. Hera's hatred never faded. The gods still used him. Fate still tightened its threads. He had done the impossible 12 times, and still the world demanded more. He married again, Deianira, not for politics, not for glory, but for something close to companionship. For a time she softened him, laughed with him, built a home where war did not enter uninvited. He glimpsed the man he might have been, had madness never claimed his hands. But fate followed close. At a swollen river they met the centaur Nessus. He offered to carry Deianira across. Midstream he betrayed her. Heracles' arrow flew. Hydra venom found its mark. As Nessus lay dying, he whispered deceit. His blood, he claimed, would ensure fidelity if ever Heracles strayed. Deianira, afraid of losing what little peace she had found, believed him. She kept the blood. Years passed. Whispers of infidelity reached her ears. Fear bloomed. Not rage, not hatred, but fear of abandonment. She soaked a tunic in Nessus' blood, gave it to Heracles with trembling hands. A gift, a charm, a mistake. He put it on, and agony began. Not fire, worse. The venom seeped into his skin, burrowed through muscle, blackened blood. He clawed at the garment, but it clung to him, fused to flesh. Every attempt to tear it free stripped skin with it. He roared, not in battle, not in fury, but in pain so profound the mountains seemed to tremble. The strongest man alive, brought low not by monster, not by God, but by love twisted through deception. And as the poison consumed him, Heracles understood. He had not been born for peace. He had been born for endurance. And the world, faithless, hungry, relentless, had never stopped asking him to suffer for it. He screamed, and the mountains answered. The sound tore through valleys, shattered against stone, rolled down slopes like an avalanche of agony. Birds fled from trees. Shepherds dropped to their knees miles away, convinced the earth itself had split open. Heracles hurled himself into a river. The water hissed. Steam rose around him. The poison did not wash away. It burrowed deeper. He clawed at his own flesh, trying to tear the tunic free, but it clung to him like a second skin forged in torment. Where he ripped, skin came away with cloth. Blood poured down his legs in dark rivers, yet still he did not fall. He smashed trees from their roots, shattered boulders with his fists, split stone as if it were clay. But nothing dulled the agony. He lifted his face to the sky and begged, not for forgiveness, not for redemption, for death. But no lightning came, no divine hand reached down. Even in suffering, the gods were silent. Diana realized, too late. She saw what Nessus had truly given her. Not loyalty, not love, vengeance. Horror consumed her. She hanged herself in despair, ending her life in a quiet room far from the screams echoing through the hills. And Heracles, the son of Zeus, the lion of Greece, the breaker of monsters, was left alone, not slain by an enemy's blade, not struck down by divine madness, but undone by the trembling, well-meaning hands of the woman who loved him. He did not die. He could not. He was too vast for simple collapse, too strong for mercy. So he chose his own ending. He climbed the slopes of Mount Ida, carried logs upon his back as he had once carried the sky. Each step deliberate, each breath fire. At the summit he built a pyre, wide, high, stacked with resin-rich wood that would burn hot and fast. He climbed atop it, lay down upon the timber, and waited. His companions stood around him in silence. Men who had fought beside him, men who had seen him tear lions apart and walk through armies. They wept, but none would move. No one dared light the fire. Who would dare burn Heracles? Who would claim responsibility for ending a legend? The silence stretched, until a young warrior, Philoctetes, stepped forward, not yet burdened by destiny, not yet hardened by loss. He took the torch, met Heracles' gaze, and set the pyre alight. Flames rose. Thick smoke spiraled upward. The scent of resin and flesh mingled in the air. Heracles did not scream this time. He endured, as he always had. The fire consumed his mortal body, and high above, Zeus looked down, not with pride, not with sorrow, but with inevitability. He had fathered this son, set him upon a road of blood and suffering. Now he would claim him. Thunder cracked, lightning struck the pyre, and as mortal flesh burned away, something rose, not bone, not ash, essence. Heracles ascended, lifted from pain, lifted from memory, lifted from the world that had both forged and broken him. He entered Olympus, not as guest, not as supplicant, but as equal. Hera herself, who had hunted him from infancy, offered truce. Whether it was reconciliation or surrender, none could say. She gave him her daughter Hebe, goddess of youth, as wife. The hatred that had defined his life ended not with apology, but with acceptance. The man who had lived like a beast and died in fire became a god. His mortal story ended in agony. His myth did not. Statues rose across Greece. Cities bore his name. Athletes invoked him. Warriors prayed to him. But those who remembered him most clearly did not speak first of the lion's skin, nor the labors, nor the strength. They remembered the man who had killed his own children and never escaped that shadow, who held up the sky but could not hold together his own peace, who conquered monsters but could not conquer grief. He was not gentle. He was not righteous. He was necessary, and that was enough. But the age of Heracles faded. The gods withdrew slightly. The world seemed tamed. Cities grew. Temples gleamed in sunlight. Sacrifices smoked beneath marble columns. Men believed order had returned. But beneath the calm, something stirred. The gods, eternal and restless, grew bored. And boredom in a god is a dangerous thing. The greatest wars are not born of hunger or gold. They are born of pride. And pride was about to rip the world apart. It began with a wedding, not a love match, a precaution. Peleus, mortal king of Phthia, brave, competent, unthreatening, was chosen by Zeus for a reason. Thetis, sea nymph of terrible beauty and older blood, was forced into marriage. Zeus had once desired her, until prophecy whispered that her son would surpass his father. Zeus remembered Uranus, remembered Cronus, remembered the cycle of sons overthrowing fathers. And so he broke it. He married Thetis to a mortal. Better a strong son rule among men than challenge Olympus. The gods gathered on Mount Pelion. Wine flowed. Apollo played his lyre. The muses sang. For a moment, heaven itself seemed at peace, until Eris arrived, uninvited, unwelcome. She carried no blessing, only a golden apple. Upon it were etched the words, "To the fairest." She cast it among them, and vanished. Hera reached for it. Athena stepped forward. Aphrodite smiled. 3 goddesses, 1 prize. No judge bold enough to decide. Zeus refused. He would not ignite that fire himself. Instead, he cast the choice downward, to a mortal, Paris, Prince of Troy, shepherded by circumstance, handsome, vain, unburdened by wisdom. The goddesses descended upon Mount Ida in secret. Each made her offer. Hera promised dominion over kingdoms. Athena offered victory, glory, the mind of a strategist. Aphrodite promised love, the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose beauty. He chose desire. And in doing so, he chose war. Helen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus, daughter of Leda and Zeus, desired by every king who had once sought her hand. Whether by enchantment or willingness, she left with Paris, boarded his ship, sailed for Troy. Menelaus returned to an empty palace. Humiliation burned hotter than grief. He invoked the oath sworn by all her former suitors, that they would defend her marriage should it ever be violated. And they came, not for love, not for Helen, but because no king could afford to stand aside when the tide of war rose. Agamemnon took command. Odysseus was dragged from feigned madness. Achilles was drawn from hiding, unable to resist glory. Ajax, Diomedes, Nestor, hundreds more. It was not an army. It was inevitability given form. They gathered at Aulis, 1,000 ships ready, but the sea lay still. Artemis had been slighted. The winds refused to blow. The oracle spoke. Blood was required. Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. She was summoned under false promise, told she would marry Achilles. She arrived hopeful, trusting, and was led to the altar. Some say Artemis spared her at the last moment. Others say the blade fell. Either way, the winds returned, the sails filled, the fleet launched, and the greatest war in mythic memory began. Not with clashing swords, not with burning cities, but with the betrayal of a child, and the quiet satisfaction of gods who watched from above. Already calculating how much blood would follow, the ships moved east, their prows sliced through the wine-dark sea, carving white scars into foam as if the ocean itself were flesh. Behind them, Greece faded into mist and memory, quiet hills, abandoned hearths, wives standing on cliffs with hands raised against the glare. Ahead, Troy, high-walled, ancient, unbroken. The city stood unaware that the horizon had begun to darken, not with storm clouds, but with sails, with vultures, with fate. The tempest had gathered, and it would not break for 10 long years. Never before had such a force assembled. Kings from every corner of Greece, warriors whose bloodlines traced back to heroes and whispered gods, gray-bearded veterans who still bore scars from forgotten wars, boys who had never seen a battlefield, gripping spears with hands that trembled when no one watched. From Sparta and Mycenae, from Ithaca and Pylos, from Argos and Thessaly, they came with bronze armor gleaming in the sun, with ships heavy in the water, with pride heavier still in their chests. Many did not believe in the cause. Few believed in Helen. None dared refuse the call, because to stand aside was to be remembered as a coward. And memory in Greece was everything. As they gathered along the gray coast of Aulis, it began to feel less like an army, and more like a script unfolding, as if the ending had already been carved into stone. The fleet stretched beyond sight, 1,000 dark hulls resting against the tide like wolves crouched before the hunt. Oars bristled, shields hung along rails like rows of silent faces. The beach became a city of bronze and smoke. Blacksmiths hammered through the night. Wine flowed freely. Boasts rose louder than the waves. Old rivalries flared beneath forced alliances. It was not unity. It was tension disguised as purpose. At its center stood Agamemnon, brother of the wronged Menelaus, king of Mycenae, commander not because he was loved, but because he demanded it. He wore armor even when there was no battle. He walked the camps with measured steps, voice sharp as steel, gaze always calculating. He carried kingship like a shield, and wielded it like a weapon. Yet even he could not command the wind. The ships were ready. The men were ready. The sea was not. Days passed, then weeks. The sails hung limp, the air heavy and unmoving. The sun scorched the sand by day and abandoned it to cold darkness by night. Whispers began. Food dwindled. Fights broke out over nothing. Superstition grew thick as weeds. The gods, silent for so long, had spoken, through stillness. And stillness, when it lingers, becomes decay. Then came the message, through priests, through omens, through the uneasy certainty of repetition. Artemis was angry. Some claimed Agamemnon had slain one of her sacred deer. Others said he had boasted that he surpassed her in archery. Still others suspected deeper currents. Hera's resentment, Athena's calculations, Zeus delaying fate until the moment pleased him. The gods never spoke plainly. They preferred riddles, thunder, silence, but the demand became clear. No wind, no sail, no war, until Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia, young, untouched by politics, unaware of divine games. She was summoned under the promise of marriage, told she would wed Achilles, the brightest warrior among the Greeks. She came dressed in white, eyes shining, heart light with hope. Her mother, Clytemnestra, walked beside her, trusting, believing. She was met not with garlands, but with ropes. The truth spread through the camp like wildfire. Clytemnestra screamed. Achilles raged, outraged that his name had been used as bait. But Agamemnon stood firm, stone-faced, torn between army and blood, between pride and love. He had already lost control of his men. He would not lose control of the gods. What happened upon the altar remains divided by myth. Some say Artemis intervened at the final heartbeat, replacing the girl with a deer, spiriting her away to serve in distant lands. Others say the blade fell, that her blood soaked into the stones, that her scream rose into the wind and never faded. But the next day, the wind came, cold, steady, reluctant. The sails filled, the oars dipped, the fleet turned east. The men cheered, not from joy, but from fear of silence, because silence meant remembering, and remembering meant guilt. Agamemnon stood at the stern of his ship, watching the horizon. He did not speak of his daughter, nor of the wind, nor of the gods, but the decision he had made was already sailing back toward him. Years away, held in the hand of his wife, carried by a blade, the fleet moved like a shadow across the sea, and Troy waited, high walls gleaming in the sun, unaware it had already been chosen to burn. When the Greeks landed, they brought more than swords. They brought inevitability. 10 years would pass before the city fell. 10 years of blood, of pride grinding against pride, of men unraveling beneath the weight of their own glory. They dug trenches, raised fortifications, built altars, offered sacrifices. But even then, they knew this would not be swift. This would not be clean. This would be endurance. A war not of survival, but of legacy. At its heart stood Achilles, son of Peleus, son of Thetis, mortal king, immortal mother. He had been hidden as a child, disguised among girls, shielded from prophecy. But fate does not forget, and when the drums of war sounded, he emerged, not as a boy, but as flame. His body carried divine blood, his strength unmatched, his rage limitless. He did not fight cautiously. He fought like a god who had learned pain. When he entered battle, men died, lines shattered, fields ran red. The Trojans whispered his name at night. Achilles. It crept through their dreams like sickness. But Achilles was not a weapon to be owned. He bowed to no king, least of all Agamemnon. Agamemnon saw him as a blade, sharp, dangerous, useful only when obedient. Achilles saw Agamemnon as a crowned thief, demanding honor he had never earned. Their alliance was necessity, their bond was poison, and the war began to fracture from within. When Chryseis, daughter of a Trojan priest, was seized and Agamemnon refused ransom, Apollo answered. Plague swept the camp. Men coughed blood. Pyres burned day and night. The gods had turned their faces away. The answer was clear. Return the girl. Agamemnon relented, but not without spite. He seized Briseis, Achilles' prize, not for desire, for insult, a king asserting dominance, a humiliation deliberate and public. Achilles did not roar. He did not threaten. He withdrew, returned to his tent, laid down his arms, and the war shifted. Without him, the Greeks faltered. The Trojans surged, and at their front stood Hector, prince of Troy, son of Priam, husband, father, not divine, not destined for glory, only human. And yet, he stood. He fought not for fame, but for home, for wife, for child. He became the shield of Troy, the wall before the wall. And as Achilles sat in silence, the balance of war tilted. The storm had reached its center, and it had only just begun. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to break. Their ramparts trembled under Trojan assault. Their ships, once symbols of invasion, became targets, flames licking at their hulls. The shoreline that had felt like conquest now felt like a trap. Panic spread through the ranks like smoke through a burning city. And still, Achilles did nothing. He sat apart from the war as though it were a distant storm, listening to the clash of bronze and the screams of the dying with eyes that refused to soften. Kings pleaded, soldiers bled, commanders faltered. He remained unmoved. until the one thing he loved more than glory stepped into the fire. Patroclus, friend, brother in arms, soul-bound companion, whether in loyalty or something deeper, the poets never agree. He could no longer endure watching the Greeks collapse. So he did what pride had prevented Achilles from doing. He put on Achilles' armor, the shining bronze forged for a demigod, the helm crested with terror, the shield that carried legend. He rode into battle not as himself, but as a ghost, a living echo of the hero who would not come. And for a moment, the tide turned. The Trojans faltered at the sight of that terrible armor. The Greeks rallied, believing their unstoppable champion had returned. Patroclus fought like fire given human form. He drove the Trojans back from the ships. He cut through their lines. He forgot caution. He forgot the warning Achilles had given him. Do not chase them to the walls, but battle is a fever, and fever clouds the mind. Hector met him outside the gates. Prince of Troy, defender of the city. He saw through the armor. He saw the truth. This was not Achilles. This was a shadow wearing borrowed thunder. Their duel was brutal and brief. Apollo struck first, some say unseen, weakening Patroclus with divine touch. A Trojan spear followed, and then Hector's blade. Patroclus fell, his body stripped, his armor taken, his corpse dragged through the dust before the walls of Troy. And when the news reached Achilles, silence fell, not the silence of apathy, the silence before an avalanche. He had ignored the deaths of strangers. He had watched commanders kneel. But this split him open. Grief shattered the dam pride had built. Achilles did not return to war. He unleashed it. At dawn he rose, hollow-eyed, unshaven, unearthly. He did not eat. He did not speak. He went to his mother, Thetis, sea-born and sorrowful, and begged for new armor. Not crafted by mortal hands, but forged by Hephaestus himself. The god of fire bent over his anvil. Hammer met metal, and from flame came a shield etched with the cosmos. Cities at peace, cities at war, stars wheeling above mortal lives too small to comprehend them. Greaves fit for gods, a helm radiant as the sun, a spear so heavy no other man could lift it. When Achilles returned to the field clad in divine fire, even the daylight seemed to pale. He did not fight. He slaughtered. He moved through Trojan ranks like a storm wearing skin. Men begged. He did not hear. Men fled. He did not slow. The river Scamander itself rose against him, choked with corpses, furious at the pollution of its sacred waters. Achilles fought the river too, defying nature, defying balance, forcing even a god-fed current to recoil before his rage. He was no longer a man. He was vengeance. And then, Hector, the prince, stood before the Scaean gates. Alone, armored, breathing hard. He knew he would die. He knew Troy's fate was tightening like a rope. But he stood, because some men choose death over dishonor. Achilles chased him around the walls of Troy, 3 times, mocking him, relentless, until Hector stopped running, until fear gave way to resolve. Their duel was swift. Achilles drove the spear into Hector's throat, not deep enough for mercy, only enough to end him. Then he did what even war hesitated to bless. He pierced the corpse's ankles, tied the body to his chariot, dragged it again and again around the walls of Troy while the city screamed, while Priam and Hecuba watched, while Andromache collapsed. It was not for victory, not for justice, for Patroclus. But vengeance does not heal. It only deepens the wound. That night, an old man entered the Greek camp. Alone, Priam, king of Troy, wrapped in rags, back bent by grief. He crossed enemy lines guided, some say, by Hermes himself. He knelt before Achilles, before the man who had desecrated his son. He did not curse. He did not rage. He said only, "Remember your father," and imagine him alone. Something broke. Achilles wept. For Patroclus, for Hector, for himself, for the father he would never see again. He returned the body. He allowed Troy to mourn. For one brief moment, the war paused, not for treaty, not for strategy, for grief. Even the gods watched in silence as the mightiest warrior alive bowed his head. But grief does not stop fate. Achilles knew his own death walked toward him. His mother had given him the choice long ago, a long, forgotten life, or a short, immortal one. He had chosen glory. He had chosen song. And fate does not delay those who embrace it. He died not in thunder, but in a whisper, an arrow loosed by Paris, guided, they say, by Apollo's unseen hand. It struck his heel, the only place left vulnerable. Such a small wound, so undignified. Yet Achilles was no ordinary man. And when he fell, the Greeks did not cheer. They mourned like sons mourning the father of their war. His body was recovered, his legend sealed in blood. His armor became the next battleground. Ajax, towering and unbreakable, expected the honor. But Odysseus, silver-tongued and cunning, spoke better. The armor was awarded to him. Ajax, humiliated beyond endurance, fell upon his sword. Another hero consumed not by enemy blades, but by wounded pride. The age of brute strength ended there. Only minds remained, and the sharpest among them was Odysseus. 10 years. Troy had endured 10 years. Walls said to be built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves still stood. But war does not favor the strong. It favors the patient. In a firelit tent, Odysseus conceived the final act. Not with steel, but with deception. A horse, massive, hollow, carved as tribute. A false offering of surrender. The Greeks pretended to sail away. Fires extinguished. Camps abandoned. The horse left behind. The Trojans argued. Cassandra screamed warnings, cursed to see truth and never be believed. Laocoon hurled his spear into the horse's flank and cried, "Beware Greeks bearing gifts." But sea serpents rose from the depths, crushed him and his sons before the altar. The gods had chosen. The people obeyed fear disguised as faith. The horse was dragged inside the gates. Beneath stars that watched without blinking, the Trojans feasted. They sang. They drank. They believed. When sleep claimed them, the hatch opened. Odysseus, Menelaus, the elite of Greece. They emerged like shadows from a tomb. They opened the gates, signaled the fleet waiting beyond the horizon. And Troy died. The Greeks flooded in. No mercy, no restraint. Priam was slaughtered at his own altar. Hecuba dragged into chains. Cassandra violated before the statue of Athena. Andromache enslaved. Her infant son hurled from the walls so no air might rise. Temples burned. Homes collapsed. The sea turned black with smoke. Golden Troy, proud Troy, was ash by dawn. The Greeks had won, but victory tasted of rot. They had conquered not by honor, but by deceit, and the gods grew silent. The victors sailed home to ruin. Agamemnon to a wife holding a knife. Odysseus to 10 years of wandering. Menelaus to a marriage forever fractured. The war was over, but its curse lingered. Troy burned. Its shadow did not, and those who survived carried its ashes in their lungs. Forever. So ended the greatest war of the ancient world. Not with justice, not with peace, but with ruin. It was never truly a story of heroes and villains. It was a story of pride, of betrayal, of the terrible price of being remembered. The fires of Troy did not die quickly. They burned for days after the slaughter, feeding not only on timber and silk and bone, but on grief. Smoke coiled into the sky like a black offering, as if the city itself were trying to reach the heavens one last time. The Greeks had sung of victory for 10 long years beneath torn tents and blood-stained banners. But when victory finally came, it was silent. There were no golden laurels descending from Olympus, no divine chorus, No triumphant horns, only smoldering stone, only widows screaming into the ash, only the slow, rusted sound of chains tightening around the necks of those who had once called themselves free. They had won, yes, but as they stood among the ruins of a civilization older, richer, and in many ways greater than their own, even the proudest among them began to feel something unfamiliar. Doubt. Priam lay butchered at the altar where he had once prayed for peace. Hector was already a memory of honor. Paris, whose desire had sparked the inferno, died not in glory, but in the shadow of his own shame. Cassandra, cursed prophetess, saw every horror before it came, and was taken by Agamemnon as a prize. Her visions would follow him home like a shadow that refused to loosen its grip. Andromache, widow of Troy's champion, was dragged into slavery. Her son, an infant born of nobility and innocence, was hurled from the walls so that no echo of Troy might rise again. The Greeks left nothing behind but rubble and smoke. And still, it was not enough to cleanse the stain. The journey home should have been swift. The war was won. The winds had returned. But the gods had watched. And what men had done in victory sickened even those who had once fueled the war. Athena turned cold when her temple was desecrated. Poseidon remembered the ancient loyalty of the walls he had helped raise. Apollo did not forget the cries of his priest's daughter. The gods had ignited the war, but men had made it monstrous. And so vengeance came slowly, not in thunderbolts, but in storms, in shipwrecks, in madness, in betrayal. Agamemnon returned to Mycenae crowned in triumph. At his side, Cassandra in chains. Waiting for him, Clytemnestra. She had not forgotten the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia. She welcomed him not with kisses, but with steel. He died not on a battlefield, but in a bath, cut down by the woman he had wronged. Cassandra died beside him, her prophecies fulfilled, her warnings finally understood too late. Odysseus set sail for Ithaca. Clever, silver-tongued, survivor of gods and men. Poseidon cursed him for his arrogance. 10 more years he wandered. Cyclopes, sorceresses, sirens, shipwreck after shipwreck. His men died one by one, lost to hunger, temptation, and divine cruelty. When at last he returned home, unrecognizable and hollow-eyed, he found a kingdom worn thin by waiting. Penelope had endured, but endurance is not untouched by time. He reclaimed his throne not with celebration, but with blood. There was no feast for his return, only survival, only silence. Menelaus brought Helen back to Sparta, radiant still, ageless, untouched by visible remorse. Whether she had loved Paris or merely been carried by fate, no one could say. Menelaus did not ask. He placed her beside him again as if nothing had burned for her name. But the men who had watched brothers fall for her face, they never forgave. Some called her a curse, some called her a pawn. All knew the gods had wrapped a war around her throat like a jeweled chain. She became less a woman, more a symbol, of beauty, of ruin, of desire powerful enough to level empires. The rest returned to broken homes, to fields choked with weeds, to children who did not recognize their fathers. Some were shipwrecked, some slain before they saw their shores. Some wandered until they forgot why they had left. The age of heroes did not end with thunder. It ended with rust. Blades dulled, banners rotted, and the world moved on. Only the poets remembered. They lifted names from the dust and set them among the stars. Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, Helen, Agamemnon, Priam, Ajax, Patroclus. They became constellations in a sky that no longer believed in miracles. The bards sang long after Troy's ashes cooled, because to forget would mean admitting that men once believed in something larger than themselves. Honor, fate, glory shaped by divine hands. But the world changed, and the gods began to fade. They did not fall in battle. There was no uprising like Cronus against Uranus, no prophecy like Zeus had once feared. The gods faded quietly, because men stopped looking up. Once every storm had a name, every forest a spirit, every sea a temper. But in the silence after Troy, people began to ask why. New kings rose. They spoke of law, of empire, of gold, not of Hera, not of Poseidon, not of Hephaestus. Temples still stood, but sacrifice became ceremony. Ceremony became habit. Habit became hollow. I cannot survive boredom. Some say the gods withdrew, tired of mortal pettiness. Others say they died. If gods can die, it is not by sword, but by silence. Perhaps they foresaw new names rising. Thinkers, philosophers, men who carried power in ink rather than lightning. When humanity learned to question thunder, thunder lost its voice. Zeus became a metaphor. Hera became resentment personified. Apollo became art. Athena became intellect. Hades became inevitability. And Prometheus, fire thief, rebel, sufferer, became hero, for he had done what all great minds attempt: steal from the heavens and give to man. The myths endured, not as commandments, as echoes, not as literal truth, but as mirrors. Homer sang of Achilles and Hector long after their bones turned to dust. Hesiod mapped the Titans like fossils of a forgotten age. Poets polished the legends until they gleamed brighter than they ever had in life. And people listened, not because they believed, but because they remembered. And perhaps that was always enough. To be remembered is not to die. To be remembered is to become larger than flesh. The Olympians ruled the world once, but in fading, they became eternal. Myth does not rot. It lingers. It waits. So when thunder cracks across a clear sky, when the sea holds your gaze too long, when a dream feels older than your blood, remember, the gods are not dead. They are stories, and stories do not die. They sleep, waiting for someone to speak their names again.